My name is Barbara Williams Emerson, and I was born in 1948. I was born on March 4th, which is the only date in the year that makes a statement, March 4th. And I was born in Bainbridge, Georgia, which is a small town down in the southwest corner of the state. I lived there until I was 7 years old. And at 7, I moved with my mother to Asbury Park, New Jersey, which is on the Jersey Shore. And I lived there till I was 15. And at 15, I rejoined my father and his family in Savannah, Georgia. Lived there for 1 year, then moved to Atlanta. Lived there for 1 year, and then went away to college and spent a year in Baltimore, 2 years in DC in college, and then I moved to New York, where I finished college and university and spent the rest of my adult life and career. In college, I started out to be a medical doctor and to discover a cure for the common cold. I then discovered there was such a thing as sociology, and I liked that far more because it studied society, and I wasn't really clear that there was such a thing, and I liked that because it fit in with what I had been doing in the civil rights movement. So I got a bachelor's in sociology, and then lo and behold, I started looking at graduate schools, and there was a degree in community organization and planning, which was exactly what I had been doing in the civil rights movement. And it amazed me that you could get a master's degree from Columbia University in this, and I did that. And then I went on and got a job, and it was even more amazing that someone would pay me to do what I thought it was my responsibility to do, which was to help other people, particularly Black and Puerto Rican people, to reach their potentials. My father was the infamous and famous, iconic, in the truest sense of the word, iconic civil rights leader, Reverend Dr. Hosea Williams. And he was, amongst many things in the civil rights movement, he was the director of the SCOPE program. He's the best example that I know of the adage that your circumstances do not determine your destiny. He was the product of two blind people. Both of his parents were blind, and his father, he never knew his father until he was an adult. His mother was a blind, Black, single teenager, and he was born during the Depression, and then his mother died when he was 10. And he grew up in rural southwest Georgia on a farm, literally dirt poor. And from there he went on to become a research chemist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, became involved in the Savannah movement, and that was when he met Dr. King, and became a lieutenant to Dr. King, and was uniquely, even as a civil rights leader, he was uniquely involved heavily in the two movements that were responsible for the major pieces of legislation that were the results of the civil rights movement. He was involved in St. Augustine, Florida, which was the movement that pushed the passage of the Civil Rights Act for the desegregation of public accommodations, and he was seminal in the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which was why SCOPE was formulated in order to prepare people to be ready to take advantage of the Voting Rights Act, and Dr. King commissioned that scope, the Summer Community Organization and Political Education Project, and appointed Hosea as the director of that project. It was of interest to me because it was about voting, and I was convinced, along with many other people, that that was the predominant and most significant way of bringing about change, and we were convinced that something had to change. I had grown up under segregation, as I said, in Southwest Georgia in the early 50s, in terms of recognized and legal segregation. And then I had also grown up under de facto segregation in New Jersey. The first time I went to school with white children was in the 8th grade. I was in segregated school in New Jersey up until then, although technically schools were integrated, but I never had a white teacher until the 9th grade, I think. So I had experienced both legal and de facto segregation. I had known how it affected people of color economically, specifically. So I was amongst those people who knew that something had to change. So that's why I was a part of it, but I also didn't have a choice because I was Hosea Williams's eldest child. As far as being attracted to it, I was assigned to it by my father, as I was assigned to do other adult tasks as a teenager. During the Scope summer, I had just graduated from high school, and because I had been on an academic track, I didn't learn to type, and he was convinced that that was the most important skill. So when I graduated from high school, he required me to take typing in the morning, and he gave me a 2-seater Austin Healey Sprite, which was a soft top car. So I had to go to a public high school to take typing at 7:30 in the morning, and then I had to come to work at the Scope office. And my responsibilities were to do all of the fiscal work. So I had this gray steel money box that I had to carry with me at all times. And I still have a mark on my left side where I carried this gray steel money box everywhere that I went, because I couldn't even leave it in the car because it was a soft top car. So I had to carry it with me to my typing class at 7:30, and then I had to go directly to the Scope office and bring my cash money with me, which included all of the petty cash, and all day long there was coming and going out of the Freedom House, and the petty cash had to be on hand. And then I worked in the Scope house until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and go home and then do it all the next day. And although I was 17 and a girl, because he trusted me and thought of me as much older and as strong as any man, so I got the assignments of an adult and lots of times as a male. So I didn't have a choice, and I don't think I would have made any other choice anyway, because I knew how important it was that we do the work. Well, the challenge for me in particular was just keeping up with the workload and the expectations of myself that were made of me. The challenges for some of the other young people was it was a culture shock for a lot of the students who were recruited to come down and work in the program, and I had experienced a similar culture shock just 2 years before.
Tell us about that.
Well, I had grown up in New Jersey, and the civil rights movement to me was what I had seen on television. people marching and then getting sprayed by water hoses, fire hoses, and attacked by dogs. And I had never been in a demonstration, but I had come down in June after my sophomore year in high school. My grandfather drove me down, and I'd come to live with my father and his family in Savannah. And when I got there, my father was in jail for leading demonstrations in Savannah, and my grandfather dropped me in my little steamer trunk with everything I owned in it, because I was coming to live with my father and his family and go to school there. And he dropped me into what I thought was going to be a wonderful new change of pace from my working class existence in New Jersey to this lovely palatial new ranch style modern home that they had in Savannah with 2 cars and the ebony magazine lifestyle that I thought they were living, that I was now going to receive my inheritance into. And a major fact for me was that I discovered that they lived around the corner from Savannah State College. And so in my mind, I knew I was going, by hook or crook, I was going to go to college. And when I found that they lived around the corner from Savannah State College, I said, I want to go live with these people, because I can walk to college from their house. If need be, I can walk to college. Well, I got there, he wasn't there, he was in jail, and my stepmother and these 4 little kids were sleeping on the floor in different empty houses at night, so that they were not the target of local racists who were after them, or the police who were after them. And we were, from the first night that I got there through the rest of the summer, I was in the streets demonstrating every night in a civil rights march. So that's how it was my introduction to the civil rights movement. So I knew for these young people who were only a few years older than me, because they were college students, coming to the South and being immersed into very low income, colored, because that's what they were at that time. We weren't even, we were in the Negro phase at that time, Negro neighborhoods or communities, that it was a completely different world for them. So a lot of it, I know for people, was cultural adjustments. I actually didn't have very much contact with local whites, because at that time, it was possible for a person who was actually, we were actually middle-class black people in my family, it was possible to have a very comfortable life and stay within the black community and not have to come into contact with whites very much at all, because you knew how to navigate through it. You could go to a black, which we did, you could go to a black private school, a parochial school. You went to a black church. You could stay on the black side of town and go to stores and restaurants there. If you did go downtown to Riches, or you knew when and where not to go, you avoided the segregated facilities. So I didn't have that. You protected yourself, and you could manage to do that. And you were trained that way. You knew where to go, where not to go. And racist white people, to us, we really thought of them as they had ugly ways. And so you avoided people who had ugly ways, and you really thought that that you were better, not less than. You were better than people with those ugly ways. Now, that was because, like I said, we had the advantage of being what really was a bourgeois, middle-class upbringing. Now, for people who did not have the privileges that we had, and you had to come up against that hardcore racism, it was a different world. But it was possible to maneuver your way if you had the means to do so. The biggest thing that I learned was that you had to be your own person. I've had this theory that those of us who did come of age in the 60s, African American women in particular, we were like the last of the old and the first of the new. It's sort of like you had one foot in the old and one foot in the new. So I did grow up under segregation. I do remember when the white and the colored waters fountains. I do remember when I was little and I would go to New Jersey, having to go into the colored at the train station. But I would go into the colored train station, and my mother had made me a completely new traveling outfit, so it was like, ta-da, here I am. And we would ride in the colored car until you got to a certain point, and then you wouldn't have to ride in the colored car anymore. So I remember the first time a little white girl living across the street from me called me a nigger. So I went over to my godmother's house, and I was like, why did she call me that? And my godmother said, well, that's all right. They're poor white trash anyway, so you just won't play with them anymore. So I do remember, and so I knew what it meant to be thought, for people to think that you were less than they were, and what segregation was. But by the time, so I say we were raised to be good little colored girls. You had decorum, you knew how to dress, you knew how to act, you knew how to behave, and you knew how to behave. You knew how to be you were taught how to be a good little colored girl. But by the time we graduated from high school and were in the movement, and then the feminist movement came along, by the time we graduated from college, by the time you became a woman, you were expected to be a big, bad, black woman. So by the time you stepped into womanhood, there was a whole different expectation. You had this afro, and you were expected, it was black power, and you were expected to be your own woman and to be powerful and to be empowered and to step into your womanhood. Mm-hmm. So there was a transition that I made and women like me made, just as I think that the community made. It's like we came of age with the community, just as black people themselves went from Negroes to being black people. It was an empowerment, it was a growth, it was a claiming of your identity, it was a strengthening. It was literally going from, you sit like this, you sit up, you rise up, The biggest challenges and hurdles were just the enormity of it. That people were going to be able to do this who had never been able to do it before. I think at some point we realized how it's like almost like don't ask for what you want because you might get it. Okay, so we've been doing all of this to get the right to vote, and now that's coming down the line. So now we have to go out and get people to participate in this process, to convince people who had never been able to do this, who in fact had been beat and discouraged and kept from doing this, to convince those people that, okay, now it's okay that you can go, come on, let's go downtown and register to vote. That was asking people to take a leap in faith, practically, to come and follow me. I can hardly register. I'm hardly old enough to register to vote, and you've been, 40 years you've been trying to register, and you haven't been able to, and now I'm saying, oh, just come and follow me because they passed a law in Washington, so now we can go and do it. So that was the challenge, I think, the hardest part of it. For some people, it was like, okay, I've been waiting, come on, let's go. But for other people, it was a challenge because it had been something totally denied. I think we stand now at a point where it's very challenging because either people are apathetic or they're lethargic. And I make the distinction because the people who are apathetic have not used the right, and the people who are lethargic have used it and are so overcome with the results not panning out to be what they think it should be. So there's almost a need for voter resuscitation, of bringing people back to the point where they have faith in the vote. But I think there have been a number of hope-giving local instances, such as the election of the new mayor in Atlanta, even the fact that there is an African-American female candidate as recently as for governor, as recently as last week in Atlanta, the elections that have happened in Alabama. There have been a number throughout the country. There have been a number of more progressive since the presidential election. There have been a number of more progressive wins that I think have given people some resuscitation that, the progressive or liberal hope isn't completely dead. Oh, that's a very good question. Of one moment that would sum up the scope experience. Well, I think it would be actually the beginning, the orientation. The orientation was at Morris Brown College in the gymnasium. And if a picture could capture the enthusiasm that was the young people who came to that orientation, both the enthusiasm and the shock that was present when they began to realize what they had really gotten themselves into. It's important for all of the 18-year-olds to vote because it is the single best way of having an impact on your future and the future of the people who come behind you.